speakers on the way. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's electoral forum by People with Disability Australia. On behalf of People with Disability Australia, I'd like to welcome you here to the McEwer Hotel in Sydney, or if you're tuning in via the webcast all around Australia. I want to acknowledge that we are meeting on the lands of Indigenous people and that we respect their elders. Tonight, we're bringing together the disability community and a great political panel in a conversation about the future. I acknowledge Senator Jan McLucas, Senator Mitch Fifield and Senator Rachel Siewert. How great it is to have the main parties in the room talking disability a week out from a federal election. This is a first for us, and it speaks volumes about the support right across the aisle in Canberra for disability. So thanks, guys. Well done. We've got a fantastic MC, Tim Ferguson. Tim is a widely acclaimed comedian, writer and producer. He's toured the world performing stand-up and musical comedy, co-writing dozens of live stage comedy shows and light entertainment programs. Tim was a member of the comedy trio the Doug Anthony All-Stars. He's written and produced sitcoms and is Australia's foremost teacher of screen comedy. I'm also delighted to join a great panel tonight with Joan Hume, OAM, who is a founding and life member of People with Disability Australia, a former director of People with Disability Australia, and a current director of Spinal Cord Injuries Australia. Now, I also welcome a lady who basically put the bolshy into the word diva. Sam Connor, a member of the NDIS Expert Committee on Workforce Development and Sector Capacity, and a member of the Ministerial Advisory Council on Disability for Western Australia. Tonight isn't just a debate, it's a conversation and a place to ask questions and get involved. If you're on social media, send us your questions. The hashtag is PWDA Q&A, and there's also an event happening right now on our Facebook page. I'd just like to point out that none of us have seen the questions that you ask, including me. We're doing this election forum because this is a vital election as we consolidate the reforms for disability driven by thousands of advocates from across Australia over the last few years. PWD was started in the International Year of People with Disabilities in 1981. So we know how easy it is for disability to fall off the agenda. That's why we've been working hard, building bridges and setting agendas in the lead up to the election. We've visited more than 30 candidates, members and senators, including people in leadership positions from the Liberal Party of Australia, the Australian Labor Party and the Greens. We've held 7 social media forums since January to spark a community conversation. When they stopped the petition on change.org, we started a new one and worked to reframe the discussion on jobs. We've been talking directly to people in the media and writing articles in The Australian, in the ABC, in Fairfax Online. We've produced an edition of Link Up, which you've got on your seats tonight. It profiles the parties of the policies of 18 parties, some of which you've probably never heard of and may not hear from again. So get stuck in and have a look at those policies and decide which party you want to support. We've given countless interviews and spoken at events, from the ACOS election launch to the ABC People's Parliament 2 weeks ago. We've developed a PWDA election forum platform for 2013. It's got 4 priorities based on what you told us. We've got ideas and solutions. We're not just coming up with a wish list or a set of complaints this time. These are to get real on jobs, deliver disability care, stop the abuse and make the convention real. It's appropriate that we launch our policy on the convention tonight. Work on the convention was bipartisan. It started under the Howard government. When I met with Philip Ruddock 2 months back, we actually acknowledged the energy and the effort that he'd made in the lead up to New York. And the National Disability Strategy to make the convention real and pull all the levels of government together to work on it was initiated by Kevin Rudd and then launched by Julia Gillard. I believe that disability cuts right across the divide. It's not our way to take sides in elections, and we never will. Our project in disability has never been narrow. Neither is it about creating a culture of care, even though there are entitlements that are a fulcrum in our lives. We know better than anybody, with the possible exception of the first Australians, that the wrong kind of care can be the care that drags you down. Disability rights is about freedoms, rights and responsibilities. Freedoms from abuse and neglect, violence and places that trap us. Freedom to purchase our own services. Freedom to control our lives and to make our own decisions rather than having them made for us. Reagan said that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. Some of us can remember within our lifetimes being shut in, shut out and shut away in places like Lamia, and some of us are still stuck behind walls. Our project is also about rights. Rights to access the spaces and places that other people take for granted, to justice and a fair go. We don't shirk responsibility. We embrace it. Responsibility is to be part of work, part of volunteering, as community and as citizens, to create our own families, including for mums and dads with an intellectual disability, to participate in all areas of Australian life, you know, getting on the bus, going to school, going to work, being volunteers and being campaigners, buying or renting a house. These might seem ordinary to some of you, but for some of us, they are the green light that we run towards. The campaign for an NDIS is about what happens when we work together and find common cause on these things. But our battle isn't won, folks. It's not over. While Australia ranks last in the OECD on poverty and employment for people with disability. It's not over while we have inaccessible buses and taxis that leave people stranded in the rain for 4 hours. It's not over while getting a mammogram or going to the GP is too hard or is put off because the examination chair is too high. It's not over while we have people trapped in lives of desperation and violence in boarding houses. It's not over while some people earn a few dollars for hard work in a factory just because they have a disability and they work until their 80s or 90s or until they die. It is not over while children are locked in cages in schooling, tied down or segregated. It's not over while people say we might as well be dead and the media reports the murder of people with disabilities as an act of mercy. It is not over while an Indigenous man with a disability can spend a decade in jail without charge just because he had a disability. That's what's at stake. That's why you're here tonight. That's why we're here tonight. But folks, if we can keep going, if we can keep joining our political parties, if we call talkback radio shows, talk to your candidates, sign petitions, you know, call out businesses or departments that don't do the right thing, comment on blogs, spread the word on Facebook and Twitter, get involved, join Mitch's party, join Rachel's, join Jan's party. Get on board with PWD to campaign with us, to join with us and to fight with us. If we do all of these things, if we keep going beyond the NDIS, then we will not just win the NDIS, we will change this country for good and forever. So thank you. Thank you for coming. Get involved, ask questions. That's enough from me. I'd like to hand over to our host with the most, Tim Ferguson. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Craig. Some great thoughts there. Well, as you can see, we have, you know, the heaviest hitters in Australian politics sitting right up here. We've got people from all the major parties, and of course, you know, Craig and Sam and myself. In the interest of disclosure, I should say to the Minister and all the others that I too am running for the Senate in this federal election. Obviously, I'm running in a wheelchair, so it's already not really going very quickly. But the good news is for you, I have no intention whatsoever of getting into Parliament. I only did it on a dare. Someone said, "Aren't you busy enough?" I said, "No, I could do something else." They said, "Well, you couldn't run for Parliament." I said, "Well, of course I could." Next thing you know, I'm running for Parliament. So that's been interesting. I'm just trying to think of policies, and so I decided it's easier if I have no policies and make no promises. That way, interviews are much shorter. They say, "Okay, well, thanks for coming on the show. I'm afraid I can't comment on that," and I'm gone. So there you go. Yeah, just for fun. I've had what I have, which is multiple sclerosis. Since 19, it first reared its shark fin. And they call multiple sclerosis because it's lots of tiny little scars. So they use the word multiple, which is, of course, brilliant. They really know how to do their titles. And of course, the nickname for it is MS, which spells the word Ms, which explains why it's so unpredictable and moody and takes so long to get ready in the morning. Now, well, how long? I know, I'm taking the risks here, sir. But you might be wondering, what is MS? Well, basically, it's what happens in your immune system. Your immune system turns on your brain. I try to think of it as if my immune system is a bit like a team of thousands of little Barnaby Joyces. And they will attack anything if it's standing still. They'll jump on it and kick it, and they'll say, "I don't even know what it is," and I'm bunching it up. And so if I get run down, or if I'm on tour, or if I'm running for the Senate, then the little Barnaby Joyces start rampaging around my system, bug-eyed around my system, looking for something that might be causing the problem. And if I don't have a flu, then the poor Barnaby Joyces say, "Well, I don't know, I went looking, I didn't find anything." So the little Barnabys then turn on this stuff called myelin, which is like the rubber tubing around every nerve in your central nervous system. This is as effective a health strategy as trying to, cure your seasickness by giving yourself the clap. Cruise ships have tried it for years and it just doesn't work. Well, and there are two kinds, basically. There's the one which I've got, which they call repeating remitting, which means, it comes, it goes. It's here, it's gone. It's a bit like, forgive me, an ALP leader. Here they are, they're gone, and then they're back. Hi, you forgot the pudding bowl. That's right, yeah. The other kind is it's much trickier. They call it secondary progressive. There's also tertiary progressive, and I imagine quarterly possessive. This is where it just turns up and it stays, which is more like, one nation. No matter what you do, they just won't go away. So that's what it is. And what happens, of course, is like my nerves stop working, my brain stops talking to the rest of my body, and the next I've got legs that are only 10% active. They're a bit like the physiological equivalent of the Greens political party. They're only 10% active, but they're absolutely carrying on like they run the place. So it's a whole political battle that's been going on in my system for about 30 years. In fact, exactly 30 years as far as I've been able to tell. And so I just keep trying to stay ahead of it, but which is all any of us with a disability of any kind, with any extremity can do, is we try to get on with things. We try to work. We try to avoid paying tax as much as we possibly can. I've said too much. But, we try to contribute as much as we can. For some people, there's not much that we can do at times to do anything but to try and, keep ourselves held together. But our aspiration is the same as anybody else, to do as much as we can to change the world, make it a better place. I just finished a memoir. I read a memoir, they call it. And I said, okay, I'll do a memoir, but I don't really re-memoir anything. They said it doesn't matter. Nobody tells the truth in these things. So I've just written a memoir which is called Carry a Big Stick, because I walk around the world carrying a big stick. And it is about my whole life from birth. I was born 1 week before John F. Kennedy was assassinated. I don't know anything about that. And it's about from that moment all the way through, and it tells the story of my MS, which I kept a secret for a long time. For years, I didn't tell the media, I didn't tell my family. I wasn't telling anybody. I didn't want anyone to worry. But eventually, I got tired of telling people what the stick was for. What's the stick for? Well, it's a walking stick, so it's for walking. Well, why do you need a walking stick? Because I like sticks. People would just keep asking. What's wrong with your leg? What's wrong with your wife? What's wrong with your hair? What's wrong with your fashion sense? And eventually I thought, I'll come out and I'll tell everybody, and I have. And the amazing thing is, I was always nervous that I would get a lot of pity and concern when I finally told the world, what was going on in my system. And I have to say, since I came out with telling the world I have MS, I haven't received any sympathy at all. I said I haven't received any sympathy at all. I said I haven't received. There we go. Yeah. Thank you, because I know that's spontaneous. Yeah. If you can pat me on the head, that'd really help. But the adventure goes on, and we all have different things that are in our way. Some people are just born, stupid, and they've got that in their way. And, they will always be in their way. And what can you do? You just have to put them in the lower house. I say that because we've got senators here. We're allowed to pick on those people. So, yes, this evening I've got some housekeeping to tell you about. First up, we have washrooms which are outside those doors at the back there and to your right. We have a hearing loop which is in service. It's accessible in all parts of the room if you need to hook up to the hearing loop. Welcome, of course, to our 2 support staff at the back of the room. Could you raise your hands, please? Support staff. There they are. I thought they'd run away, but no, they're here. So they're over there. Hi, great to have you here. And welcome to our very beautiful Auslan interpreters. There they go. See, they're making very beautiful and then go, point to their own faces. And so the questions for tonight were selected from those submitted from the audience as you registered and online. We have worked to choose a selection of these questions which cover as many of your issues as possible. Our panellists have not seen the questions. If we've selected your question to be asked, when I call your name, please just stand up or raise your hand so that we can get a microphone to you. I'll be reading the questions from people watching via the webcast. And hello, webcast people. Listen to the silent roar. Yep, they're out there. And now I'd like to introduce our panellists. Answering your questions today in alphabetical order are Craig Wallace, the President of People with Disability Australia, who's right here. Craig Wallace. We have Senator the Honourable Jan McLucas, who's Senator for Queensland, Minister for Human Services. Hi, Jan.
Thank you.
And then Joan Hume, founding and life member of People with Disability Australia and recipient of the Medal of the Order of Australia, the OAM, for services to people with disability. So, hi, Joan. Senator Mitch Fifield, the Shadow Minister for Disabilities, Carers and the Voluntary Sector and Manager of Opposition Business in the Senate. Senator! And a Doug Anthony All-Stars fan, which, you know, I think that's a good thing. Senator Rachel Siewert, the Australian Greens spokesperson for Family, Community and Disability Services. Rachel. And Sam Connor, a member of the NDIS Expert Committee on Workforce Development and Sector Capacity and member of the Ministerial Advisory Council on Disability in Western Australia, very far away. Unless you're in Western Australia. So, everybody okay? A couple of the ground rules are really very simple. If I start by asking you a question, try to keep your answers as short as possible. For example, yes. Just because we've got a lot of questions here, but you know, 60 seconds should be enough to basically get your thoughts across. And no pinching, no biting, unless I misbehave. And you know, everybody have fun and enjoy yourselves. This is, as Craig said, you know, important stuff we're talking about, but we want people to, you know, enjoy what we're doing here this evening as well. Enjoying an experience helps us remember what happened, which is well, I work in comedy, so you can imagine. So, everybody ready to go? Yeah. Okay, everybody in the crowd ready to go? Yeah. Hey, here, take a selfie. Okay, here we go. Our first question is from Samantha Jenkinson, who is watching via the webcast from Perth. The question is from Samantha, how will you ensure the promotion and implementation of the National Disability Strategy, and in particular, how will you engage with state government and with community to put the National Disability Strategy into practice? The National Disability Strategy has been overshadowed by disability care, which is an incredibly important reform, but without a successful National Disability Strategy, we won't achieve the full potential of the disability care reform. That's from Samantha. So, Senator Fifield, if we could start with you, your thoughts.
Thanks, Tim. Well, I think everyone was excited when the National Disability Strategy was signed by all Australian governments. It laid out a blueprint for how to improve accessibility and supports for Australians with disability. But it has been a little overshadowed by the NDIS. I think the important thing to remember with the National Disability Strategy is ultimately what will give effect to it is the will of individual ministers in all governments, state and federal. Transport, for example, what is going to see an improvement in accessibility is an individual transport minister in an individual state deciding this is important and I'm going to make a difference. So the National Disability Strategy is a guide, but ultimately it comes down to the political will of individual ministers, and I think the role for whoever is the Federal Disabilities Minister is to make sure that that remains front and centre in the minds of all Australian governments. That's a challenge. It's got to take constant reinforcement, but I just want to emphasise that ultimately it comes down to the will of individual ministers and members of Parliament.
Thanks very much, Senator. Senator McLucas, if the ALP returns to government, what will you do to make the NDS a priority?
Thanks, Tim, and I do thank Samantha for that question, because in my view the National Disability Strategy is the overarching architecture really for the disability specialist care system, Disability Care Australia. Unless we actually make sure that everything we do is inclusive in any level of government on a routine basis, then the work that we're doing around the specialist care and support will be always fighting against the environment, the culture and the society. What we did when we adopted the National Disability Strategy, and as Mitch said, signed by 3 levels of government, we then took that to the what is now called the Standing Council, which covers disability itself. We got agreement from that Standing Council, and the inference in Sam's question around the need for the state governments to become much more engaged is absolutely true. That's where a lot of the decisions and policies are made that affect our built environment, our schools, our health systems, etc. So what we did then was we identified that getting a disability champion in each of the other standing councils. So the Standing Council on Transport, the Standing Council on Health, the Standing Council on Education would be a way to go, so that the permeation of the National Disability Strategy into all other levels, other types of policy areas would occur. That has occurred, and it means that when you're in, say, the Standing Council on Education, and we're talking about education policy, you've got a person in the room whose job it is to think for people with disability. So being able to have that number of champions in each of the other standing council is another step. But the final thing I think we need to do, and we've started doing, is doing the reporting on the National Disability Strategy. So governments are then obligated to report back to our government on their progress around achieving outcomes through the National Disability Strategy.
Thanks very much, Senator. Sorry to interrupt, but
No,
Senator Siewert, your feelings on the NDS?
Thanks, Sam, for giving us a minute, supposedly, to answer this question. I think what the new government, whichever brand it is, needs to do is to take a stock take of the NDIS and look at where they're up to, because I think you'll find it's pretty low level of implementation to this stage, because it has been it's been put on the back burner while NDIS was put in place. I actually think that, yes, I agree the state governments need to be held accountable, but so does the federal government. And I think each minister in cabinet will need to take on board their responsibility under the strategy, because we are talking across the board, across all portfolios. Each minister needs to realise that they have a responsibility under that strategy to make sure they're delivering on the outcomes under the strategy, and that includes then working with their state counterparts and also local government, because we can't let off local government in this process either.
Okay, thanks, Senator. And Craig Wallace, any advice for the incoming government, whoever they might be?
Absolutely. Look, disability care will not fix everything. It's not the silver bullet that fixes the community. Coming here today from Bankstown into the city, along Parramatta Road, I counted around 60 businesses that had small 2-inch lips. They were inaccessible. So we need resources behind the National Disability Strategy. At the moment, there's only 5 new policy proposals there that are modestly funded. We also need some work, I think, on some of the structural barriers and the actual impediments in law. We've got a weak Disability Discrimination Act that is complaints-based, and you have to put your assets on the line to actually, get a result out of that. And the National Disability Strategy should be addressing that, or just giving us money under the NDIS will be useless unless we've got an accessible community to actually purchase things in.
Okay, well, thanks, everybody. We have a second question from Sam French. Sam, are you here this evening? Oh, Sam, let's get a microphone to you and let's see your question. Fire away.
Thanks. Okay. People with disability can find it more difficult to navigate government, departments and support structures within society to gain what they need. There is significant prejudice focused on people with disability, as well as a range of structural and other barriers. What are some of the things that you plan to do to address these barriers and prejudice? Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, so Senator McLucas, some of the strategies you think you'll put in place?
Well, I come back to the National Disability Strategy, which is a overarching policy structure. But a couple of areas that we've done already and that we will continue to do is the work we've done on the built environment, which is around adopting the access to premises standard, being able to also put in place guidelines around residential building so that people can build from scratch houses that are accessible. The question of prejudice is one that is very real. And I think that we will continually fight that prejudice and that shut-outedness through the involvement of people with disability in community, and that's what disability care will do when it's fully rolled out. The goal of Disability Care Australia is to have an inclusive society where people participate to their aspiration, not to the amount of space that society will give them. But it is still a real problem, and Craig's point about the way that that our complaints-based mechanism is a valid one. We do need to have more ability for people not to use that adversarial type system through the Human Rights Commission, but to find ways that will include them in a as expected type of way.
And Senator Fifield, if you form government on day one, your thoughts and strategies for dealing with prejudice and these structural reforms that still have to occur.
Sure, thanks Tim. And I do want to acknowledge at the outset that I think the current government have done some good work in relation to improving accessibility through the building standards issues, through some of their legislation in relation to captioning. So it's important to acknowledge where there have been some advances. Ultimately, when it comes to people's attitudes, that's not something that you can legislate. It's something that government can endeavour to lead by example and to demonstrate. One way to improve people's attitudes, I think, is to have more people with disability in employment. If you have a disability at the moment, you're probably twice as likely to not be employed. So I think there's a role for government to employ people with disability to demonstrate that, look, it's not that hard and everyone has a contribution to make. I also think that there are some things that we can do to smooth some of the pathways for people into employment. I don't think that the current DES arrangements have a spectacular success rate. There's a lot of failure there, so I think we need to look at how we can improve employment placement, how we can have the right incentives for employment providers. I think that the single greatest way to change the attitudes of people, of the community towards people with disability is through greater employment. And just coming back to where I started in relation to issues of accessibility, there is a big role for state governments. I'm not putting federal governments off the hook, but a lot of the issues to do with physical accessibility are very much in the purview of the state governments, and there is certainly a role for federal government to endeavour to hold the state governments up to the mark.
Thanks, Senator. Sam, Connor, you work in workforce development. Obviously, that's getting the private sector to be involved in this. Do you have any strategies to, make this an appealing option for private business to start coming up with structures in their buildings?
I'm actually a public servant, so I work for... is this working? Yep. I work
talk out that way. I think your microphone's on the wrong side.
I'm actually a public servant. I work for a TAFE, and last week I went to a public sector employment strategy launch in Western Australia. In the room full of 100 people, there were 3 people with a disability, which coincidentally is the percentage of people in the public service who have a disability. One guy wasn't going to be able to be the speaker because they forgot the ramp, which is pretty much the experience that a lot of us have. I'm in a battle with my workplace over an accessible toilet, which is a really usual experience for a lot of people. I think Mitch is right, but there are some things that we can do in terms of legislating change. In Western Australia, we have disability access and inclusion plans in the public sector, and the 7th outcome, which is being brought in now, is about is about employment, equal opportunities for people with disability to actually access employment in the public sector. So organisations will have to come up with action plans and actually report against them in their annual reports every year. So that kind of thing, I think, where we have that systemic approach to inclusion in employment, I think is a really good idea.
I think Senator Fifield made a point, which is true, that great advances have been made since the 70s. I remember being a kid and seeing that there was a national campaign that was talking about people with disabilities. It was right up there with the Care for Kids kind of campaign, and since then, you know, a lot of buildings have been, you know, slightly changed and designed so that things are a bit easier for us to get around. But that battle will always go on. Joan, if it's okay, I'll leap to the next question and oh, yes.
I forgot to say something which is actually very, very important, and that is the maintenance, that to achieve the outcome that Sam has identified, we need to have an independent advocacy sector. That is absolutely essential. We've continued and we've increased the funding to the NDAP program over the time we've been in government. It's terribly important, and today we've announced another $1.5 million a year to advocacy over the forward budget cycle. But advocacy is absolutely critical.
Could I just add in there too that we did, if you remember when we were debating the NDIS, included in that as a result of the negotiations over the NDIS was the capacity for the agency to be an advocate as well. So that's really important because we recognise that NDIS, as we've just been talking about, doesn't address all the issues, and in fact people should be able to get same services as everybody else, and so therefore what was built into the role of the agency was also the capacity to be advocates as well over particular issues.
Thanks, Joan Hume. Craig Williams?
Just quickly, one thing. Mitch is right that government can't do everything, but there is one thing that government could do. Government is a major purchaser from private businesses of goods and services, places and spaces, and they could actually include in their tender requirements and in their procurement policies, you know, an accessible procurement requirement. They do it for purchasing from Australian disability enterprises. Let's do it for purchasing from businesses that are diverse and that build accessible infrastructure.
Thanks for your question, Sam. Connor. It's a good one. It's got everybody up and talking. Here we have a question from Margarita Coppolino. Oh, hi Margarita, right down the front. Grab a microphone.
Thank you. This is a question for Mitch. Can the Coalition provide us with the assurance that the National Disability Insurance Scheme won't be dragged out and sat on due to the lack of funds, and that the national expansion of it, as planned, won't be halted by the incoming government on the premises of the inherent poor fixed outlook?
So, Senator Fifield, yes, what assurances can you give us about this program?
Well, answer to the question, yes, I can give that assurance. Our support for the NDIS is unequivocal. We will and have committed to all of the announced expenditure. We support and will honour the agreements for all of the launch sites. We support and will honour the agreements between the Commonwealth and all jurisdictions for the full statewide, nationwide rollout of the NDIS. And we are committed to the time frame for implementation, which has been agreed to between the Commonwealth and all jurisdictions. So yes to every question. It is going to happen. We're committed to the plan.
And given all the things that, of course, are promised in an election, the cost of your party's promises so far has been quite high in other fields. Will you have the cash to cover it all?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, our call on the budget bottom line overall will be less than the current government, but we are absolutely and completely committed to the NDIS, having it fully funded, having it delivered according to the timetable that has been agreed. So there's no caveats there. The support is unequivocal.
Joan Hume, you've been an advocate for disability for a long time. How confident are you that either of the the two big major parties capable of seeing this through?
Well, I can certainly say that there have been tremendous attitudinal... I should be using this, no, sorry. There's certainly been a lot of changes over the last 30 years. We first held on behalf of People with Disabilities Australia in its previous incarnation as Disabled People's International, a forum like this in 1984, and most of the things that were being talked about were social security, pensions, those kinds of things. In that time, we've seen the implementation of the Australians, the anti-discrimination legislation at federal and state levels. We've seen the implementation of a whole range of services. We've seen a much higher profile of people with disabilities. So I can say that I'm not a spokesperson for particular parties, but I certainly think that disability has been put on the national agenda in a way that it never has been before. But the only way to keep it there is the eternal vigilance on our part, because we will always be a kind of an outsider group, and the only way that we can have full inclusion, full participation and equality 30 years down the track from the International Year of Disabled Persons is by continual education, continually keeping a high profile, making, continually protesting against discriminatory and demeaning attitudes, and continuing to fight the fight. Now, I honour the fact that the three parties are here with their representatives, and they are prepared to discuss the issues in a serious way that 30 years ago I don't think would have been possible. So, but we've still got a long way to go, and this forum is a way of ensuring that we can continue to make it happen.
Thanks, Joan Hume. We'll move on now. Our next webcast question is from Natalie Bird, who is a parent of a child with autism and volunteer coordinator of the Cairns Autism Spectrum Group. Having a disability in regional Australia presents greater challenges for families and individuals due to the limited number of services and supports available. The introduction of the new disability care scheme is only going to make this shortage more apparent. What ideas, Natalie asks, do the panellists have for improving disability services into regional centres of Australia? Senator Siewert?
Thank you. Yeah, this is one of the issues that we came up very strongly during the inquiry into the NDIS. It was recognised that there would be extra difficulties, access to support staff, access to accommodation is difficult, access to a whole range of specialist services. So need to recognise that. That needs to be taken into account with funding. We need to be training more staff, and I also think we need to be making better use of IT. Last night I helped launch the teleaudiometry, some more processes there in terms of remote mapping for cochlear implants, which was, I've got to say, it was just amazing. We had a demonstration. It was fantastic. So I think we also need to be making sure that that's incorporated into our services that are delivered. But I also think, and it was great, I think that we had launch sites for NDIS NDIS stroke disability care. Regional launch sites are absolutely essential because that'll be a great learning experience, and government needs to take those learning experiences on board. And I'm also particularly concerned to ensure that we are, when we're talking about regional, we're also talking regional remote and services for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, because they are even more disadvantaged than just if you're in the region. So I think we also need to look at that as well.
Thanks, Senator Siewert. Senator McLucas, the government's ideas for regional Australia.
Well, thanks, Natalie, for the question, and I come from Cairns too. So I've got lived experience when it comes to dealing with the lack of services, the fact that attracting people to a regional centre and then getting them to stay is a challenge. Through Disability Care Australia, we're essentially going to double the funding of the service level in our country by 2019. Given that disability care, the costs of disability care are essentially people, we're essentially going to double the workforce. That's why our government invested really significantly, and Sam sits on one of our implementation task force to be able to achieve that challenge. We will need a lot more specialist disability service providers. We will need a lot more people who are going to work in the disability sector in a whole range of ways. And we know that's a real challenge. I think it's 130 million we've allocated to that. Is that right, Sam?
Something like that.
It's something like that. It's a lot of money because it's a big challenge. And if you come from a regional area, the number of people we've got and the number of services, where are the choices if you're living in a regional place? We also know that the cost of service delivery in regional areas is higher, and the further you get away from your capital city, that price increases. So that's a question that has to be dealt with by Disability Care Australia. Like Rachel, I think that the use of IT, and I'm actually a slow convert to this, is something that we can do. But with the NBN and with the quality of the technology that is now occurring, you can actually deliver particularly therapies to people in remote areas very effectively. In the last term of government, we funded sight and hearing therapies for children through the VidKids program, and the RIGBC have been doing marvellous work in that area. So there is a lot of potential there to ensure that people in rural and remote parts of Australia get the quality of support that they need, the service array that is only fair, and the number of workers and therapies that are required.
Thanks, Senator McLucas. Senator Fifield, the ideas from the coalition in dealing, for example, with the higher costs associated with regional Australia, with the NDIS.
Sure. The NDIS, as it's currently designed, does envisage. I think the figure is that if a service provider is more than 10 kilometres away from an individual, that the additional costs of transport will be factored into an individual's package. So I think that's an important thing. As Jan said, that the workforce is going to double. The demand on the demand side is also going to double. You're going to have double the amount of money in the system. So the workforce planning issues are incredible. There'll have to be a doubling of the workforce before the full rollout. So there'll need to be institutions, tertiary institutions, enrolling more speech pathologists, more occupational therapists. There'll need to be more people enrolling yesterday in various certificate courses to be disability support workers. So it's essential to get that workforce planning right, to make sure that the people are there to meet the massively increased demand. But I think that can only be a good thing for regional areas, because you're going to have increased demand, you're going to have more money in people's hands in the form of packages, and where you've got demand, that means that there'll be new organisations will be established to meet that demand. There'll be individuals who decide to set up their own businesses to meet that demand, and existing service providers who will expand to meet that demand. So it should be a good
packages, you mean like an individually tailored?
That's right. Yeah, but an individual package. So there'll be more individual packages out there, and there'll be the capacity to factor into those packages a range of costs which are unique to people in regional areas.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds great. Joan and Sam, any thoughts on this issue?
Yeah. I guess there's another issue to do with the National Disability Strategy and how that fits in with I know that for I live in regional Western Australia, and I have 2 children with autism, so the question kind of goes straight to my heart. But if you live in a regional area and you don't actually have any choice, then choice and control isn't much good to you. I think there's some issues that we have in terms of all of the policy areas working in silos and not actually working, and communicating with each other. So, for example, Kangan, Batten and TAFE, I think, closed their Auslan services, I think, last year. So those kind of issues where we're not looking systemically across the board at those sort of issues where we need to build capacity and training, and we need to make sure that those services are there for people. I think you were at a thing last week with orthodontists and prosthetists, was that right, Mitch?
That's right.
There you go, not stalking you at all. So I think there's 320 orthodontists in Australia from memory. So if we're talking about increased demand and people actually, being able to choose more and having more money, then we'd really need to have a look at how we're going to do that.
Thanks, Sam. And Joan Hume?
I think one of the greatest challenges for people with disabilities who live in rural areas is not any access to the same choices as far as education and services. Transport is a terrible issue for people with disabilities unless they have their own transport, and access to health services is a real issue too, because you don't have the diversity, the range, the ease of access, and a lot of people with disabilities who have to have regular health visits to not only GPs but to specialists have to find themselves making extremely inconvenient trips to the city, and even access to emergency services in the country can be very difficult. So there's obviously other areas that need to be certainly better funded or improving access to those services, either by having visiting specialists who go out to regional areas on a regular basis for people with very particular kinds of disabilities, or provide ease of access, less onerous in cost transport for people to bring them to major regional areas, regional centres, or down to major cities, so that they can actually have better access to those services there.
Thanks, Joan Hume. Craig Wallace?
If I can just take I think the other points have been really well made, and it's a really good question. The thing that sort of worries me around this is that some of these places are one-service towns. You've had the one service that's been providing a range of services, whether it be from employment, accommodation, respite to groups of people. And I think it's really important that we don't overcook this scheme in a way that just props up existing old service models rather than allowing competition to come in. So I think an important tenet of the NDIS is that we get some choice in our lives and over our services, and that we're not stuck with the same bad services. In regional Australia, we've got people, PWD works in remote areas where it's Bundaberg, Logan. We've got people who travel hundreds of miles just to get equipment. There's no community transport. These places are deserts. So there needs to be some market development work done, and done fast.
And we've got people in the regions watching the webcast right now. I've got a couple of mates in Blaney, New South Wales, the coldest place in the world. Even the penguins of Antarctica refuse to go to Blaney, are watching this evening with great interest. Fiona Given is webcasting in from her holiday in New Zealand. What a life. Her question is, what is being done about increasing the accessible housing stock? Sam Connor, she wanted to direct this to you first. Yeah.
I would just be directing it straight back to Craig Wallace. Not my area. So
Do you want to? Yeah.
I'll go back to Craig.
Well, I also think this needs a political response. But what I would say about housing is there's some interesting work that's come out on this. Urbis, which is a firm of independent property consultants, actually looked at the housing demand in the lead up to disability care. And one of the things that they found was that the baby boomers are increasingly retiring in the cities near where they work and have social connections, and that those people are eating up the accessible and adaptable housing stock in the cities, and that people with disabilities are being forced into the urban fringe, which is away from jobs, away from volunteering opportunities, away from the sorts of connections that would give them the capacity to participate economically and reap the benefits of disability care. I think sometimes in the housing space we get into this discussion that is about, well, if there's a housing problem for people with disabilities, what we need to do is put them all together in the one place. And we'd argue, no, this is actually a problem that's about housing affordability and about housing supply. And the major problem with housing for people with disabilities is that most of us, many of us, are poor and on low incomes and can't enter the market. And that's an area that needs work from government. Schemes like the National Rental Affordability Scheme, introduced by Labor, are good schemes, and we need to keep the effort on mainstream housing supply.
Senator Siewert, you're from Perth. In Western Australia, what are the issues that people are facing as far as accommodation goes over there, and what are the solutions?
Very significant problems in Western Australia, as elsewhere, but particularly focused in Western Australia, given that we are getting around 1,000, 1,500 people a week coming to Western Australia because of the mining boom. Scott Ludlam's our housing spokesperson and has made a series of announcements around social housing, the need to invest more money in social housing, convert to rent scheme. In other words, there's a lot of unoccupied space in many cities, and in particular in Western Australia, that could be converted to a suitable accommodation. And on top of that, providing extra funding for locations to be converted, particularly for investing in access for people with disabilities, because we realise, as Craig just said, that people with disability, and as he said at the beginning too, is many people with disability are on low incomes and are living in poverty, and so therefore need to be able to access affordable housing. And Perth isn't the only place that has an affordable housing crisis, but we are towards the top of that list. So yes, we do very significantly need to invest in social and affordable housing.
Thanks, Senator. So first, Senator Fifield and then Senator McLucas, what actions will your government take?
There has been something positive that happened a few years ago, and that was the Property Council got together, I think with Therese Rain, and worked out a new voluntary star rating system for housing stock depending on its level of accessibility, so that there'd be a reference that people could use, and you could identify those developers that were doing good work and those that were doing not so good work. And that's been taken up with some enthusiasm by sections of the housing industry. So I think that's a positive thing. But I think a tipping point probably isn't too far away when property developers are going to realise that it actually makes good business sense to have the houses that they build more accessible, because it's not just issues of people with disability. We're an ageing population. We all want to get old. And many of the issues that are relevant for accessibility for people who are older are similar to those for people with disability. And I also think that changing housing tastes are actually heading in the right direction. People prefer these days, it seems, more open plan living, bigger spaces, bigger entrances. So some of those changes in tastes, I think, are also lending themselves to greater accessibility. But it's an area where I think government does need to take a lead, not necessarily legislatively, but to sit down with property developers and say, hey guys, come on, you can do better. And I think particularly also for people, developers in the apartment market. I think that's a significant issue.
Senator McLucas?
Thanks, Tim. Accessible housing was really known to us when we came to government in 2007, so we implemented a range of strategies over the last 6 years. The first thing we did was to finally approve the access to premises standard that had been sitting around for 16 years prior to that. We then established, as Mitch has said, Livable Housing Australia with a grant of $1 million, and we've now established a not-for-profit entity whose job it is to assess building plans prior to construction and then post-construction that will give a house a rating, a platinum, gold or silver rating. The property industry will realise and is realising that a house that has a platinum rating will attract a premium when it is being on-sold. So there is a financial incentive to a property developer or a private home builder to build a house that fits with one of those standards. The next thing we did was we established the Supported Accommodation Innovation Fund, and innovation is the important word. We've been building lots of group homes and that sort of accommodation for many, many years. And our government thought we could do this better. So we allocated $120 million on a competitive tender round for people to come up with good ideas about how we can build more innovative housing, not only in its physical design, but in the way that it will be funded and in a sustainable way into the future. So we've got 19 projects from memory that are underway, and they range from high-rise in the middle of Melbourne to respite care in regional South Australia. But probably the biggest effort didn't happen in the disability space. It happened in the housing space. That when we did that huge investment into social housing and through the National Rental Affordability Scheme, there was a requirement that there was a level of those, that new construction was built to an accessible design. So there's a lot of work that's been happened. We are getting close to starting to fix the problem, frankly. It's been too long that we just didn't think about accessibility in the affordability. It was going to be too expensive. When the door manufacturers make as their standard door the wide door, instead of making that more costly, these costs will come down. But we've got to push from the front, and that's what I think our government's done, and we will continue to do it. Certainly there are a lot of hotels. I do a lot of travelling, and hotels are getting quite good at saying, yes, we have an accessible room, and I say, so where is it? Well, it's as far away from the lifts as we could possibly put it.
And it overlooks the garbage bin.
Yeah, when I finally get there, they weigh a ton, these doors. So it's, there's still work to be done, but, businesses are trying as hard as they can.
So a follow-up question on housing.
Yes, a follow-up question on housing. We'll get you a microphone.
And that is related to housing affordability and what the major parties will do if they're elected in terms of increasing affordable housing that is accessible and in general affordable housing.
Oh, so anybody jump in? Joan, have you got a thought down there? The politicians.
Sure. I think members of Parliament have always got to be very careful not to pretend that they can wave a wand when it comes to affordable housing. We hear lots of politicians talk about how concerned they are about affordable housing, but it's not an easy thing to crack, and it's at a number of levels. There's the housing market in general, and the best thing that you can do to help for affordable housing in the broad is create an environment where interest rates are reasonable for those people who have mortgages. That's the big issue. And also that you've got a growing economy where as many people as possible have jobs because they can then afford their mortgage payments. For those in the rental market, again, the more people who are in employment, the more they're able to afford the rent. So at the macro level, that's the most important thing. A lot of housing affordability issues are in the preserve of state governments and their policies in relation to how much land they release, because when you've got a restriction on land, and housing stock that forces prices up. So a lot of those issues to do with land use are the responsibility of state governments. When it comes to the issue of people with disability, for those who require some form of accommodation supported accommodation, the NDIS will be a help. There are two elements there. One is the packages people need for recurrent expenses, and at the moment we know that there aren't enough packages. The NDIS should fundamentally address that. There's then the issue of the bricks and mortar, how the NDIS might support that. The agency haven't yet come to a concluded position on how best to provide the mechanisms for the bricks and mortar, but they're looking at a number of options there. Then there's the issue of homelessness, which is another element, I don't pretend to be an expert on that side of things. I'll leave that to my colleague Senator Payne. But they're just some thoughts in the broad on some of the main areas of housing.
So Senator Siewert, Senator Fifield's outlined, the spectrum of challenges. Any solutions that your team's coming up with that might help?
So I touched on it before, Senator Ludlam's announced that we would, and we've had this costed, 122,000 new social houses plus another 15,000 convert to rent, with an additional allocation of funding for conversion to improve access. The package also includes issues around renters' rights as well, and and then on the affordability side, and I realise it doesn't help everybody with a disability, but those people with a disability on New Start, you'll be aware that we've been campaigning very heavily for an increase of that for $50. So we want to tackle the issue from both sides, increase income, as well as obviously strategy around improving employment and access to much better income. But on the supply side, we want to actually build some more houses.
Senator McLucas?
Thanks, Tim. Look, the stock is the real issue, and that's why the investment that we've made over the last 6 years in really increasing the social housing stock at least provides some more options. But there's still a lot more to do there. The waiting lists at the state level are still embarrassingly long. But I come back to the National Rental Affordability Scheme. That has been really successful, and I do pay tribute to Tanya Plibersek, who brought that in when she was the Housing Minister. That has assisted particularly for families who are on lower middle incomes, who don't get into social housing market, but they can't get into the private rental market without that rental taking an enormous chunk out of their weekly pay. Yeah, I'm not the housing spokesperson, so I don't know any further detail for you.
Sam Connor?
Just the one thing that has been raised over and over again is a bit of an elephant in the room. At the Disability Care Conference, a property developer came out and...
Can I move that for you?
Is it better? At the Disability Care Australia Conference, a property developer actually profiled a kind of thinly disguised cluster village and said, was that too straightforward? Sorry?
Yeah,
It was, so because we've lived under a ration system for so long, I understand that so many parents of young people, especially with very high support needs, have looked at congregate living and congregate options to try and fix the issues that we've had with living under a ration system. So the concern for me is that with more freedom of choice, although the NDIS, Disability Care Australia, isn't tied to bricks and mortar, so support's not being tied to bricks and mortar as far as I understand, there is that little bit of a risk that with increased choice and control that people, especially parents, might think that this is a great idea for people. And I guess everything that the research says, everything that people with disabilities say is that taking people with disability and putting them together in one place is a really, really bad idea. So I guess that's my concern, is that, you know, that we don't do that in a climate of increased choice and control.
Thanks, everyone. Rob Hardy is with us this evening and has a question. Rob, where are you? Hi, Rob.
Hi. One of the areas that receives little attention or discussion is the sexual and reproductive health and rights of people with disability. And there are a number of barriers and societal taboos, I guess, that contribute to that. My question is, how will you ensure that disability care goes beyond funding and supporting people around the everyday essentials and supports them to have full lives, including their dreams and aspirations for sexual and intimate relationships?
Senator Fifield?
I'm not going to pretend to have an answer for you, other than I think it's just going to be so important in the planning of someone's supports, the planning in someone's package under the NDIS, that an individual's goals and those of the people that they have as family, that they live with, share together. And we can't, we can't sit here and necessarily anticipate what those goals will be. People are going to have an incredibly wide variety, and when people get the supports that they need, that will put them in a better position to be able to choose to live their life in the way that they want to. So I don't want to give more of a specific answer than that to the issue of sexual choice that people have.
Senator Siewert, carrying on from what Senator Fifield's just said, are the sexual and intimate needs of people something that the government should be in the business of facilitating?
They certainly should be in the business of ensuring that people's, when they're talking about choice and control, that choice and control does include any of the sexual developments that they want, the relationship developments that they want. As many of you will be aware, I chaired the Senate inquiry into forced and coerced sterilisation of people with disability, and one of the issues that came up very strongly there was that parents with a child with a disability often don't talk about their sexual life, or they don't get any sexual education, because they don't think there's something they should be worried about, or they're embarrassed, a whole range of reasons. And so it's absolutely essential that in the NDIS, disability care, sorry, as I said, I'm using it interchangeably, that we don't cut off people from that yet again, but it goes back to, you'll be aware of our recommendations, and that we also made comment around the need to ensure that parents, that people get access to the same sorts of sex ed that everybody else gets, and that parents are actually encouraged. We need to be also encouraging parents to make sure that they have the discussions the same way that they would with their other children as well.
Thanks, Senator. And Senator McLucas, the government's role in, as Senator Siewert was saying, education and helping people, help their kids should they be disabled. Where does the government, what's the government's role in all this?
Well, in terms of the sex education role, all children should have access to good quality sexual education. Full stop. Doesn't matter who you are. But in terms of the, I think getting to the question that Rob asked, it will come to the different way that a person with a disability works with Disability Care Australia. It's around the question of planning. Currently, at the moment, in most of our states and territories, if you have a disability, you go to your state disability provider or disability government, state government department, and there's a list of things you can get. You can get personal care and support, you can get a wheelchair, get a hearing aid, or whatever it is. What Disability Care Australia does is turn that on its head. So instead of looking at a list and seeing where you slot in, you say to a person, what do you want to be? How do we achieve that? So if the person's reasonable and necessary requirements will include support for their sexual and reproductive circumstances, but that the term is reasonable and necessary, then there's an opportunity for a conversation. So it comes down to that planning process. What is the planning process about? And how do we assist a person make those choices about what they will want to do to achieve their goals?
Thanks, Senator. Craig Wallace?
Look, I'd just like to say, well, yes, actually it is reasonable and it is necessary. If you talk about the sort of basic drives that people have and the basic rights that people have, you know, food, housing and expression of sexuality are up there as things that we all need and do. And I'd call on our politicians to be bold and be brave to this one. You know, don't be afraid of the headline that says, well, we spent NDIS funding supporting people to use a sex worker. The fact is that everybody has a right to their sexuality. And the other thing is that they should stop sterilising us and stop interfering with our right to reproduce and be full human beings.
Yeah.
Thanks for your question, Rob.
Could I ask a supplementary question today?
Oh, sure, sir.
I just wanted to ask, so does that mean in terms of things like where we have religious service providers, or so there will be some restriction on service providers laying their own morality on the services they provide?
Can I answer that?
Oh, yes, Sam Connor.
One of the concerns that I had in the workforce group is that a lot of people with disability who are from the LGBTI groups had concerns about, you know, when you have your lovely lady from St Vincent de Paul who...
Sam, they can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. So when so for the LGBTI sector, that people, when you have your lovely lady from St Vincent de Paul who may not approve with your sexuality choices, that can be a restriction on your choice and control. The other thing was about using support workers. I think we had a fairly interesting stoush on the workforce panel with somebody who said, you know, that you should only be able to use support workers for two people with cerebral palsy, say, to position each other together in bed. And I said, well, they knock off at 5 o'clock, and what time do you have sex? And so they're the kinds of conversations. I think it's just a learning curve around, you know, understanding that we have a really, you know, people with disability are as diverse as any other person, and, you know, that our needs need to be encompassed by a whole range of it. We can't be limited by providers. We can't be limited by, you know, that lack of choice.
Thanks, Sam. Stuart Morby here this evening has a question for us. Stuart, we'll get a microphone to you.
Thank you, Tim. Does anyone on the panel... Oh, thanks. Does anyone on the panel think it's fair to move people off disability pensions if it's deemed they are capable of some kind of work without taking into account financial hardship this might impose, or the actual impracticality of finding work?
Craig Wallace, the issue of being taken off disability pensions?
Well, I would simply say that, you know, we've had 3 terms of governments where they've fiddled around with the eligibility of the disability support pension back to Hawke and Keating. And it's increased in real terms, and it's remained stabilised at around 800,000 over the life of this government, despite them moving it a little bit. I think that we're having the wrong conversation here. Fiddling with DSP does not create a single extra job. It does not make a single workplace accessible. It does not make employer attitudes better. In fact, the debates that we have in the community that label people with DSP bludgers, the only effect that they have is to actually make us more unemployable, to harden employer attitudes. So we need to change the conversation of victimising people on a fairly low income support payment that no one would want to be on forever. None of us want to be. Everybody wants to participate and be involved in community, and the conversation needs to move on to getting real job creation and real change, and unfortunately I'm not seeing that, but I would like to see it.
Senator Fifield, there's a supplementary question here. Coalition governments have historically been perceived as being tough on employees, and the unemployed. Does taking people off the pension work as a strategy to increase employment of people with disability, and is this a fair strategy to use?
Well, I think the perception is wrong about our side of politics, and I think you know, we'd all be in heated agreement on what I'm about to say now with my parliamentary colleagues, that I don't think any of us want to be focused on removing people from the DSP. What we want to be focused on is helping people who are on the DSP, who want to work, into work. The focus has got to be on what can be done to help those people who can work and want to work transition to work. So I agree with Craig. I think that's what the focus has got to be on.
Senator McLucas?
Thanks.
Oh yes, can we get a microphone down to this gentleman while we're getting it there? Senator McLucas?
In government, we did a number of things to increase, well, to support people with disability in the employment sector. The first thing we did was we increased the rate of the disability support pension, and that was reasonably well received, I believe. We intend in the next term to retain the DSP in its current form. There will be no change to the safety net nature of the DSP. But the other thing, and the point about getting into employment, has got to be the main goal. So by uncapping the disability employment services, that allowed people to get into the system to be connected with a job service provider, a DES provider. But the goal's got to be to get people into employment. Nobody prefers not to work, or very few people prefer not to work. So we've got to make sure that we do the best we can to get people into the level of employment that they aspire to.
Sometimes it's incredibly difficult. My brother suffered from epilepsy, which of course means that, you know, he didn't know when this was going to strike, and he was on the disability pension because he found it almost impossible to be in a workplace and function if every 3 or 4 days the next thing he knew he was waking up in hospital. These kind of complexities make it difficult to put a general strategy in place. Senator Siewert, you're in the Parliament. How can you help with delicate situations like that don't seem to fit other models?
We opposed the changes to the DSP. Both we were concerned about the changes yet again to the eligibility criteria, but also the provision that in order to get DSP you have to prove that you can't work for 18 months and try and survive on New Start with a disability while you're trying to find work. I'm really pleased that the positions were uncapped, but I think we've got quite a long way to go to improve the provision of DES services. I don't think they're meeting people's needs. I think we need much more focus on specialty areas. I think that we need to be offering more support for people once they find employment, because you're seeing people cycle in and out of work or get work and not properly be supported, and then that puts them off. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. I think that we need to be improving our DES services, and I'm not having a go at DES, but I don't think that they're providing enough. They're able to provide enough support. So we need to get that right. But I also think that we need to be reversing that process where you have to be on New Start for 18 months and prove. What people have said to me is we have to prove we fail first, and then we might get DSP, and I don't think that's a good incentive to help people to find work. And I also don't think it's a good idea. What I said before, was about support once people find employment, because we're also finding that people aren't supported adequately enough in employment and then fall out of employment, and that's a disincentive as well.
Thanks, Senator. Joan Hume, you wanted to comment?
Yes, I just want to make one comment just before you, Michael, sorry. As someone who has a background in education and who worked for a number of years in TAFE, I've seen the progressive dismantling of TAFE services, particularly, I can only speak specifically of New South Wales, and having worked in the disability services, the absolute decimation of what was once a service that completely was an ideal, a model for the rest of the world. In fact, people used to come and say, wow, what a fantastic service you had. Now, this is a key to providing training for people for a range of jobs. And we know that if you have a severe disability or disability of any kind, the thing that gives you the tool that gives you the greatest choice over the greatest amount of jobs is the degree of the amount of education you have and the training you have. And if the university sector is being disadvantaged by having funding taken from it I know it's supporting the Gonski scheme, but still robbing Peter to pay Paul on one hand, and then on the other hand we have the gradual dismantling of TAFE services and the gradual privatisation. And you have privatised training services, and you can be rest assured they're not offered in accessible premises, and people with disabilities missing out over and over and over again. So you can only get good jobs if you've got good training and good educational background. So the two are really intertwined. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Joan Hume. Sir.
Well, everybody, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Michael Hooper. My membership number is membership number 95. I've been a foundation member of people with disabilities since about 1979. Peter, by the subsequent... Yay. Thank you. My question is for today. The show of man with disability, and I say Senator Mitch McLucas. I have a following question from both of you. Are you aware of the actual mechanics in regards to the NDIS? Are you aware of the actual mechanics in order to set it up? Are you aware of the actual mechanics? I can explain it to you if you want me to.
Sorry, just am I aware of, I just missed in relation to NDIS?
Would you like me to explain?
Sure, thank you.
I've been surprised enough I made no submissions to the Productivity Commission I've given in and sent twice before it. I subsequently denied 2 submissions. What they propose the following, that the 1% levy for people on there, people with their disability, less than $20,000. Next one is between 50 and 75, which is 2.5%. Last one is 5%. 5% levy, it'll be $150,000 and above.
So the question is about levies and taxation for people on low wages.
Low, medium and high incomes.
Yep.
Also, where are they proposed for phone? But parliamentarians and senators are willing to voluntarily surrender less than 25% of the income, comprising 10% salary, 10% of their salary, and 15% of their people whatever they're earning.
So all the guidelines for taxation when people have low or unpredictable wages, strategies for helping the unpredictability of people?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Yep.
Sorry, it wasn't relating to the Medicare levy to fund the NDIS.
Right, so I do believe parliamentarians, parliamentarians, senators and public servants should make a contribution.
Parliamentarians making contributions. That's a good question. Well, if I'm elected, I certainly will.
That's a policy, Jim. You weren't going to have any policy.
Just pass. 15% income, 15% of your super.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can't commit to that in the short term.
Well, here's one thing parliamentarians could do with employment. Let's have, when we went over to the House of Representatives and the Senate for PWD, we met with senators and MPs who had Indigenous trainees working in their offices. What if we had people with disabilities working as interns and paid trainees in offices? What profile and presence would that give? What do you think?
Now, we've had people...
I like it.
We all like it, and under a Ferguson government. We've had people sending in tweets the whole way through our panel. So we might finish this evening with a question from the Twitter sphere. Craig, you've got a screen that's alive with tweets.
Yes, that's right. And one of the questions is... Sorry, the microphone is going. One of the questions is from Christina Ryan. And the question is to all three parties, aside from the NDIS, what will you do about hearing the voice of people with disability directly? So I think that question goes to advisory council arrangements. How will you listen to the voice of people with disabilities if your parties are elected to government?
Senator McLucas?
Thanks, Tim. We have established, since we've been in government, the People with Disability and Carers Council, which has been an incredibly powerful organisation. It's a very large organisation, and it needed to be, to make sure that all of those different voices are included. It has been chaired up until recently by Dr. Rhonda Galbally, and is a really amazing entity. That organisation gives us advice, or gave us advice, about the implementation of the National Disability Strategy with the release of the report Shut Out, which was one of those important documents that tends to change the mind of a nation. So that they continually give us advice around not only the Disability Care Australia, but a whole range of other areas. For example, with the work that was being done around education reform and the need for a common definition of disability across all of the states and the territories, which frankly did not exist in 2007 and now does. So the main way that our government would continue to consult with people with disability and their carers is through the council.
Senator Siewert?
Well, I think that those sorts of councils are very important. I also feel like opening up the parliament to people with disabilities is very important. So there's a parliamentary friends group that meet, depending on the issues, infrequently or frequently, depending how busy, depending what issues on the table. But I think opening up Parliament to the community, I have a basic philosophy across my portfolios of doing that, but I think having sessions in Parliament is really important. One of the issues that we had programs that we have in Western Australia is the Adopt a Poly. The Development Disability Council run a process called Adopt a Poly, and families with children with a disability adopt us. And one of the most valuable learning experiences for me was going through that process. And in WA, there's been a push to try and get that program nationally, and I reckon that's a really good program because you're actually sitting down in a person's home. You're dealing with, in my family, we had to deal with barriers to education, access to services, stupid letters that a family got. Lewis had multiple intellectual and physical disabilities, and he got a letter his mum got a letter from Centrelink saying, has he got his driver's licence yet? Sorry. I mean, you weren't the minister then, but those sorts of things are so silly, and as soon as we started talking about it, you get it straight away. And so that, I think, is a really good way of opening up politicians to people's lived experience.
Absolutely, Senator. And finally, Senator Fifield, your thoughts?
I think there are three ways to make sure that the voices of people with disability are continually heard. The first is through the sorts of processes that Jan outlined, the formal consultative mechanisms, and also through the various peak representative bodies. The second mechanism, I think, is a parliamentary one, and a proposal that we put forward that the government's agreed to, which is for a joint parliamentary committee chaired by both sides of politics to oversee the implementation of the NDIS. And the reason I think that's an important mechanism is because it'll be an ongoing committee for the best part of a decade that will travel the country, hold public hearings, And I think parliamentary mechanisms are sometimes more responsive than traditional mechanisms of consultation. And part of the reason for that is because you have members of parliament from different parties who are working together and prepared to put partisanship aside. So I think that's another important mechanism. The third, and probably the most important, is for those who have the disabilities portfolio, whether in government, opposition or the crossbenchers, constantly moving through the community, talking to people with disability. There's no substitute for spending a lot of time yourself with people with disability, talking to them, listening to them direct. So I think they're the three mechanisms. And I do just want to emphasise again that I think in all the portfolios in the current parliament, this is probably the one where each party has been prepared to work together and to put partisanship aside. And I've got every confidence that that will continue into the future, regardless of the outcome of the election.
And I think that cooperation is what we've seen here this afternoon. I'm going to let Craig wrap things up, but before we do, please thank these people for their time. Senator the Honourable Jan McLucas, Joan Hume, Senator Mitch Fifield, Senator Rachel Siewert and Sam Connor. Thank you so much. Thanks from me, and now over to Craig Wallace to wrap things up.
Thanks, Tim, and I actually think we've got some tokens of our appreciation beyond that, and from the look of them, they're drinkable, so that's quite good news.
That's what I need.
I'd just like to say thanks to our team. An event like this doesn't happen without a lot of behind-the-scenes work, and so I'd like to acknowledge our co-CEOs at PWD, also Jeremy Brennan and George Andrews. There's been a lot of work tonight. Please give them a round of applause. Thanks to you for being a wonderful audience. I actually don't think that I've seen a bigger crowd at a PWDA event. Others with more history may correct me, but this is an excellent crowd, plus the people webcasting online. You've just been great. The questions have just been cracking. We could have gone on, I think, for another hour here, but give yourselves a round of applause as well. I'd like to just acknowledge Tim. Done a wonderful Tony Jones here. I don't know if that was a concession speech or a victory speech or...
It was a concession speech. I'm not going to win, and I want to blame everybody in the country.
But I think you've just got maybe got some votes in this room as well, so good luck in the election. I'd like to acknowledge the fact that, you know, political campaigns are really, really busy times, and we've got three of the candidates here a week out from the election. I think that's really important and shows the commitment to disability, so thanks, guys. Also to Sam Connor, travelled all the way from Western Australia. We weren't sure for a little while whether you're actually going to be making it. There were pictures on Facebook of Sam in hospital. And Joan Hume, as a life member of PWD, has made a marvellous contribution. Please stay around and chat with us. There'll be refreshments coming out, and we'll be sticking around and having a chat to you. Thank you very much and good evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Now we're all too scared to go backwards.
No. Oh, yeah.
People picked me up the post by about 75%, which I never saw coming.
Can I come down?
Oh, New South Wales Senate, but I haven't done it.
You've seen this.
Just somebody said, you're not busy.
It's a, you know the